Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced that Russia has successfully carried out a test of a new generation of nuclear-powered cruise missile. The terrifying but true reality is that we cannot know for certain if Putin or any leader of a nuclear-armed state will use nuclear weapons at any time. What we do know is that nuclear weapons pose unacceptable humanitarian consequences, and that there is no response capacity to help survivors in the aftermath. My name is Njoka. Let's talk about this, and Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, an international affairs analyst, author and historian, is joining us from Brussels. Dr. Gilbert, thank you very much for making time for us, and welcome to WION World is One. President Putin is laying out clearly that he has very powerful weapons at his disposal and that he is willing to use them. What do you make of his statement?
This has to be put into the specific context. He said this in answer to a question about Russia's nuclear doctrine, and the remark about these important new weapon systems, including the successful test of the Borovesnik, which is what you were alluding to, they were in reference to the status of the ban on nuclear weapons testing. They were not made in a bare way just to announce Russia's success with a military weapon system that is novel and quite threatening. It was made to address over the heads of his audience, who are academics, and directly to the United States and the Pentagon, his appeal to reconsider how Russia and the United States are dealing with nuclear arms testing.
But let's talk more about his statements and what he spoke about. He suggested Russia could resume nuclear testing for the first time in more than 3 decades. What could be the ramification of that, and what does the treaty say?
The treaty bans all kinds of testing of nuclear weapons, whether in the atmosphere, in the oceans, or underground. It was made in the early period of normalization of arms control back in the 1960s, after the United States and the Soviet Union had a close brush with a nuclear war in what was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. The intent was to put a brake on the nuclear arms race by stopping the testing. That is now called into question because both major nuclear powers, the United States and Russia, are about to put in place new weapon systems, and they are all receiving demands from their military to conduct real tests in the atmosphere or elsewhere to prove to themselves and others that these new weapon systems actually work.
Doctor, let's talk about what is happening on ground and the reality on ground now. Some in Russia have called for Putin to detonate a nuclear bomb to show the West that Moscow's patience over its support for Ukraine and apparent unwillingness to negotiate is wearing thin. Your reaction?
Yes, you're quite correct. The issue that came up on Thursday of this week at the plenary session of what's called the Valdai Discussion Group, which had 140 participants from 40 countries around the world, including India, that was a unique opportunity to talk about nuclear weapons with the man who raised the question that you have just posed, Sergei Karaganov. It was about 3 months ago, Mr. Karaganov, who is a senior political analyst who is well known in the West, and particularly in Germany. He posed the question just as you did, that the West has been lulled by the long period after the fall of the Soviet Union, when the United States directed a unipolar world, and it has continues to view Russia as weak and as incompetent, and therefore it has lost the sense of fear, though in fact Russia remains the country with the biggest nuclear arsenal. And so Mr. Karaganov said, just as you did a moment ago, that Russia should have a test, or he even suggested Russia might use its tactical nuclear weapons and to make a strike against one of the minor NATO countries like Romania or Poland that are so troublesome in relations with Russia today. That would persuade the West that they had to pay attention lest we all slide into a nuclear war. Mr. Putin used this question, which he was well prepared for, to reiterate Russia's nuclear doctrine and to introduce the new question that we have been talking about till now, whether or not Russia will retract its ratification of the nuclear weapons ban. The status situation is that both the United States and Russia signed this treaty decades ago,
Right.
but only Russia ratified it. The United States never ratified it, meaning that any of the military of the United States can de jure proceed with nuclear weapons testing, whereas Russia has a ban on such testing written into its legislation. Mr. Putin's suggestion was to level the playing field, or to perform, as he called it, a mirror image relationship where Russia and the United States both would have unratified treaty.
Doctor, we all know that a nuclear bomb would kill millions in a matter of hours, but what are the long-term consequences of a nuclear war?
Well, there's been a lot of scholarly discussion of this. There is reason to believe we would have a nuclear winter, that all of the dust generated by these thousands of nuclear explosions would cover the upper atmosphere, block the sun, and close off the light that is essential to plants, and the plants that are essential to animals, and the animals that are essential to us, so that in effect the world would be starved to death. That is the prevailing concept of what a nuclear war would bring. We are very concerned about people who die in automobile accidents or bus accidents like the one that took place in Mestre outside of Venice several days ago, where 20 or 30 or 40 people die. We are very concerned about the 50 people, civilians, who may have been killed in a bombing in the Kharkov region of Russia, of Ukraine rather, by a Russian strike this week. But we missed the point that we are sliding towards a nuclear war where 7 billion people will die. And that is the issue of the day.
Doctor, how can the international community prevent the use of nuclear weapons, you think?
I think those who are the leading countries possessing the technology of nuclear weapons, and India is one of them, have an obligation to themselves and to the world at large to speak out about this and not to be silent witnesses to the confrontation that is ongoing between the United States and Russia. We cannot just be silent witnesses, because we will be the ultimate victims. And as I say, your country is one of the several that have the privilege and the obligation to speak out.
All right, let's talk about the war now. Putin described the war in Ukraine a battle over principles than of territory. How do you interpret that?
Well, to be honest about it, Mr. Putin's position as explaining the war has changed over time, because the war itself has changed. The United States, in denouncing Russia for a war of aggression, unprovoked war, makes reference repeatedly, particularly Mr. Biden, to the supposed imperial ambitions of Russia and its desire to take territory from Ukraine and ultimately to take territory away from Central Europe and to restore the Soviet Empire. I think that is invented. It is serving the purposes of a Cold War and of rallying the allies around the United States and its leadership. But it does not represent reality. Mr. Putin has from the beginning spoken of defending the ethnically Russian or Russian-speaking population of Donbass, which has been the subject of military attack since 2014, when they refused to accept the results of the coup d'etat in Kiev that had been engineered by the United States. This is a situation that has predominated in his explanations of Russia's actions in Ukraine over time. But it is not the only explanation. And as I say, he has from time to time modified what he says in accordance with his audience or with his reflections that change over time.
Dr. Gilbert, finally, Putin's statement comes after increased opposition in the U.S. Congress over sending more aid to Ukraine. What ultimately happens if Congress delays this aid or chooses to wait longer before they do?
Russia is receiving what it probably perceives as a window of opportunity to end this war quickly, destructively, with massive use of force, while the United States is contemplating its naval. Well, the interesting thing for people like myself who have spoken out against the war and who have tried to inform the public about its actual causes is that none of our efforts will have been consequential in ending the war, while America's internal political collapse, it may be decisive in ending the war. For the Russians, this is, I say, a window of opportunity during which they are making a transition from defense to offense and from use of very expensive missiles to cheaper heavy bombs. They had in the past few weeks introduced a totally new program of bombing using 1.5-ton bombs that are dumb bombs that have been re-engineered to either glide or otherwise to perform selective targeting, even though they were not initially developed for that. The United States has such weapons, has used it in the past. The Russians have massive quantities of such. And what is now decisive in the war is not having the latest technology, but having effective weapons in great quantities. These re-engineered dumb bombs are that, and they are likely to cause havoc in the coming weeks and possibly to end the war suddenly and decisively in Russia's favor.
All right, Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, an international affairs analyst, author, and historian. Doctor, thank you very much for making time for us and for talking to WION World is One today.
My pleasure.